Should you go out on a limb and do something out of your comfort zone? What I mean by that is if you're good at doing one thing, do you think it's a good idea to try something new and quite possibly a bit different? One reason why would be the need to expand into new territory, but of course doing that could be a huge mistake, and what you're about to see is exactly one of those mistakes. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Briggs Stratton Mega String Trimmer. Now that's not its real name, but you'll understand why I call it that here in a minute. And the problem with it is that it's been in storage for a very long time and it's not wanting to start. Now this is not a complete repair video. In fact, this is a revisit of an old repair from years ago. So if you want to see the actual repair video, click on the link at the top of the screen. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about what happens when companies like this one take a huge risk and do something a bit unexpected. Now, when I was first told about this trimmer, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but when I got to see it in person, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In fact, I did have to apologize to my friend once I realized they were telling me the truth about it. Now, if you're not sure why I'm in such awe over this rather large string trimmer, let me tell you what you're looking at. This is a very tiny 34cc 4-stroke engine, meaning it has valves and an oil sump. So what's so special about it then? Well, it's from a company known for making larger engines for mowers, pressure washers, snowblowers, and a lot more. So this little experiment into making a tiny version of their engines was a bit of a surprise from them. Now, at the time this string trimmer was being made, Briggs had a pretty good foothold in the small engine market. So for them to step out of their niche and try making an even smaller version of their engine was an interesting move. But the big question is, why would they even bother to do something as risky as this? Now, I'm not going to claim that I knew or understood their thinking at the time, but I would like to express my thoughts about it though. The one thing that I will say is that they had a very good reason for doing this, so don't think they were just actively trying to waste their resources on a fruitless venture. So if I had to guess, I'd say they knew where the market was going and wanted to get in on it before it was too late. And if I recall, this was about the same time when you started to see more and more 4-cycle trimmers coming onto the market from brands like Troy-Bilt and Craftsman. This was probably the result of the EPA tightening up emissions regulations as well. What I'm trying to say is that Briggs had a very good reason to spend a lot of money going through the hassle of making a new small engine. But if you didn't already know the future for this new lineup, I'll give you a hint. In the last decade that I've been doing this hobby, this is the only example I've ever come across. Now, I'm not sure how long this particular engine was on the market for, but it didn't last very long. But why didn't it take off? I mean, it had Briggs' name all over it. It should have sold just as well as their other products with their engines on them. Well, I think I can answer that question by telling you what I think about it after having fixed it and used it for quite a bit. Basically, I don't like it. It's too heavy, it's really only meant for certain jobs, and there's more maintenance on it than a regular 2-stroke, and if I had to guess, the cherry on top was probably the price. Now, based on its build quality in certain areas, it's built very well. So if I had to guess, I'd say it was near the price of other high-end string trimmers at the time. The problem is, a lot of the consumers back then would have been just as confused as I am when looking at it. And the very moment they tried to pick up the display model, I'm pretty sure they had the same thought I did. Why is this twice the weight of the string trimmer I have at home? Now, to be fair, because of the size of the engine, this is really meant for brush cutting, but don't let that stop you from using it around your home. I just hope you don't have a long driveway or sidewalks to deal with though. Now, this model should have come with a neck strap or better yet a chest harness simply because it's very tiring to use. Of course, if you're in really good shape, this might not be a big deal, but if you can't run a mile or do a couple of pull-ups, I'd pass on this one. So why did Briggs just not make a smaller engine than a whopping 34 cc's? I think the answer is two parts. First is that Briggs might have had an issue making it any smaller than 34 cc's. The other reason could be that they simply wanted to make an extremely powerful engine. That's why it was meant to be used as a brush cutter and not for trimming around concrete. So because of its weight and its size, they had to market it the best they could, but it was in a segment that was not very popular. Unfortunately, that's a pretty good recipe to make sure that you weren't going to make any money on it. That does bring up a good point. How much power do you want in a string trimmer? Now, too little and you won't have a lot of range, but make it too big and something terrible could happen. Now, most residential trimmers range in engine sizes from 21 to 27 cc's and are 2-stroke. That makes them simple in design and more importantly, lighter. The design on this Briggs engine, however, is a bit more robust, and that's why it's so heavy, but is that a bad thing? So if you take a closer look at this engine, you'll find that under its plastic covers, it's made out of metal, and a lot of it. If you were to compare it to a Troy-Bilt from the same year, you're going to see where all your money went. Nothing wrong with a Troy-Bilt, but you're going to notice that it was built and designed with the budget in mind, whereas the Briggs was not. So what I'm saying is, this engine is absolutely fantastic and worth every penny. And if you happen to come across one of these, I'd definitely ask if it was for sale. And if it's not for sale, at least ask them if you can try it out for a bit, just to say that you were able to use such a rare machine. Unfortunately, this one was not for sale, otherwise I probably would have bought it. So am I saying that companies should not try to go out of their way to try something new? Not at all. In fact, I'd love to see if Briggs would ever come back with their electric hybrid car that they made 40 years ago. And even though it was 20 years ahead of its time, with the way things are going right now, I think it'd be an interesting option. However, with the financial situation they're in at the moment, I don't think that's ever going to happen, and if it does, it'll be for a different reason. Now for me, if I had this trimmer and let's say the rest of the machine was in rough shape, I'd like to make it a mud motor for a small boat. Of course, it wouldn't be very powerful, but it would be a fun project to do. The other would be to put it on a bicycle and use it with a friction drive setup. And even though it would be better to use a chain drive system on it, the engine simply is too big to fit in the frame of most mid-sized bikes. Unfortunately, with gasoline going the way of the dinosaur, it would be environmentally unfriendly of me to pursue a project like that. Instead, most are ditching these small engines and favoring electric engines and batteries, but to each their own. So could I use this engine for something besides a bike? Well, I'm not sure. It's simply too small for a go-kart or a mini bike, so if you have an idea, leave it in the comments. I'd be glad to hear it. Now, one of the other reasons why this design didn't last very long was the amount of maintenance it required. And from what I can tell from the other lawnmowers I've worked on, most consumers don't want to do any sort of maintenance. So even before they picked it up off the display, they saw the 4-cycle sticker on it and said, nah, I'll pass. The more you ask of the consumer, the less likely they're going to agree with it, and asking them to do some maintenance was just too much for some people. Now, I don't think I need to do any sort of study to come up with that conclusion. The reason why is because if you told me I had to choose between a machine that required little to no maintenance versus one that requires some maintenance, I'll take the lazy way out each and every time. It's not rocket science, it's just easier to take the path of least resistance, and picking this Briggs 4-cycle trimmer is not easy in every way. I do want to thank Briggs for taking the effort in making this trimmer because it was a bold move on their part. Hopefully the person who pitched this project to the company didn't get fired over it. But if they did, hopefully they got picked up by a different company and continued making products for them. Now this can't possibly be the only example of a company taking a step away from what they know. So next, we're going to talk about some of the other examples that hopefully turned out better than this one did. So, have you ever seen a string trimmer that had electric start on it? And what I'm talking about is one with its own battery and starter on board. If so, is it a recent model? Because the one I'm thinking about is a model from over a decade ago and from a very unlikely company too. The one I'm talking about is the Ryobi ES30 with the touch start system on it. The starting system basically put a small 12-volt battery from a power tool along with a starter motor on a standard Ryobi trimmer. And if you thought the standard trimmer was heavy back then, try adding about 3 more pounds on it and see what you think. Of course, you don't get something for free, and because of all the extra stuff, you not only got more weight, but cost as well. And because of those facts, I've only ever come across yet again one example which was pretty lucky of me. Now, it was a very good trimmer despite everything that was working against it. However, if I needed to use a trimmer, I would always pass over it and grab my Featherlight instead for obvious reasons. So for me, I value simplicity and ease of use versus a lot of extras, but you might be the opposite of me, which is perfectly fine. The only other product that I've seen where innovation seemed to be the focus was on a Power Smart mower. The engine was not vertical like most others, but instead had a side shaft with a gearbox and the blade was belt driven. Now this design was very innovative, but the problem was that it made what was once a fairly simple machine about twice the complexity. That means what should have been a fairly priced machine just got a bit more expensive, and the sad part was no one even asked for it. So why did they even bother doing it then? I'm not qualified to answer that question, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was for financial reasons. Now, I don't think they were trying to be innovative. My guess was that they got a good deal on a boatload of these side shaft engines and thought they could do something with them. And to be honest, I think it was a great idea, but why? With no direct connection to the engine, if the blade should hit a rock or something hard, it's less likely for the crankshaft to be damaged. However, I don't think this choice to use this engine was based on the concept that I just mentioned. I do have to applaud the company for trying though. It was gutsy but a bit misplaced. So how do I know this mower didn't do well? Well, I've only ever seen one of these online for sale in my area, and even though I'm not going to buy it, the fact that I've only ever seen one example has to mean something. And even though I don't think this was a financial winner for them, I wouldn't mind finding one of these for free, but I'm not going to hold my breath for one either. Don't worry, the moment I find one of these interesting mowers, I'll post it up immediately because despite wanting one of these, I'm simply too cheap to get one. So do I think more companies should take a big risk by doing something that no one else has done? The answer is yes. However, with every risk, the chance for a loss is extremely high, so hopefully they know what they're doing. Now as for this one, well, let's just say this. If you come across one of these and they want you to make an offer on it, I wouldn't offer too much for it. Now these look really cool hanging on your wall in your garage, but once you get it in your hands, you're going to want to put it right back. So my question is, have you ever found something that was different from the usual like this trimmer, and if so, what was it? And if you did you ever consider buying it? As much as I appreciate this one, they can keep it. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.